The helicopter blades chopped through the thick jungle air as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell gripped her rifle tighter. The mission briefing had been clear: extract the captured intelligence officer from the remote compound before enemy forces could move him. What they hadn't told her was that this wasn't just any intelligence officer. This was Commander James Harrison, her former training partner and the man who had recommended her for the Navy SEALs program 3 years ago. Sarah had been the first woman to complete SEAL training in her class. The journey had been brutal, filled with instructors who doubted her capabilities and fellow trainees who whispered that standards had been lowered just for her. She had proven them wrong through sheer determination, breaking several training records in the process. Her specialty was underwater demolitions and close-quarters combat, skills that had served her team well in 6 previous missions across hostile territories. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, signaled for final equipment checks. Beside him sat Petty Officer First Class Thompson, a sniper with 15 years of experience, and Petty Officer Second Class Williams, their communications expert. They had worked together for 8 months now, developing the kind of trust that only comes from shared danger and mutual respect. Sarah had earned her place among them through consistent performance under pressure. The pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. "LZ approaching in 2 minutes. Weather's getting worse down there, and we've got reports of increased patrol activity in the area." Through the open door, Sarah could see the dense canopy rushing past below them. The intelligence suggested the compound was heavily fortified, with at least 20 enemy combatants and sophisticated surveillance equipment. Rodriguez reviewed the plan one final time. They would fast rope down to a clearing half a mile from the target, approach on foot through the jungle, neutralize guards silently, extract Harrison, and return to the extraction point within 4 hours. The helicopter would wait at a secondary location to avoid detection. Simple in theory, but Sarah knew that missions rarely went according to plan. As they descended toward the landing zone, small arms fire suddenly erupted from the jungle below. Red tracers streaked past the aircraft as the pilot banked hard to the right. "We're taking fire." "Multiple positions," he shouted over the increasing noise of impacts against the helicopter's hull. The aircraft shuddered as something struck the engine compartment. Smoke began pouring from the rear of the cabin, and warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. The pilot fought to maintain control as they lost altitude rapidly. "Emergency landing. Everyone brace for impact." The helicopter hit the jungle canopy with tremendous force, branches snapping and metal screaming as they crashed through multiple layers of vegetation. Sarah felt her restraints bite into her chest as the aircraft flipped sideways, throwing equipment and personnel against the walls. The noise was deafening, a combination of tearing metal, splintering wood, and the groaning protests of an aircraft coming apart. When the motion finally stopped, Sarah found herself hanging upside down in her harness, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. Her ears were ringing, but she could hear moaning from somewhere in the wreckage. Smoke was getting thicker, and she could smell fuel leaking from ruptured lines. Training took over as she quickly assessed her condition: bruised ribs, minor head wound, but nothing that would prevent her from functioning. "Sound off." Rodriguez's voice was weak but audible. "Thompson, Williams, Mitchell, report." Williams responded first. "Conscious, left arm's messed up bad." Thompson's voice came next, strained with pain. "Here, Chief. Think I've got some internal bleeding." Sarah cut herself free from her restraints and dropped to what was now the ceiling of the inverted aircraft. "Mitchell here, Chief. Mobile and ready." She immediately began checking on her teammates. Williams had a compound fracture of his left forearm, bone protruding through his sleeve. Thompson was pale and sweating, holding his side where blood seeped through his uniform. Rodriguez had taken the worst of it, with obvious head trauma and what appeared to be a severely injured leg. The sound of approaching voices cut through the jungle noise. Sarah recognized the language as belonging to the hostile forces they had been sent to engage. "We've got company coming," she whispered, helping Williams apply a field dressing to his arm. "Chief, what are your orders?" Rodriguez tried to sit up but immediately fell back, his face gray with pain. "Mitchell, you're in command now. Primary mission remains, extract Harrison from the compound. Secondary mission, get our people out alive. Sarah felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. In training, they had prepared for scenarios like this, but the reality was far more intense. 3 wounded teammates, hostile forces closing in, no immediate backup, and a primary mission that still needed completion. She quickly inventoried their remaining equipment, 3 functional rifles, limited ammunition, medical supplies, and her demolitions gear. Thompson, can you still shoot? He nodded, though his breathing was labored. Williams, you're on communications. Try to raise command and get us a new extraction plan. She turned to Rodriguez. Chief, we need to move you, but that leg needs attention first. Working quickly, Sarah applied a tourniquet to Rodriguez's leg while keeping one ear trained on the approaching voices. They were getting closer, and she could make out at least 6 different speakers. The crashed helicopter would draw them like a magnet, and the smoke rising from the wreckage would be visible for miles. We need to get out of here now, she decided. Williams, can you move with that arm? He gritted his teeth but nodded. Thompson, you're going to need support, but can you walk? Again, a determined nod despite obvious pain. The biggest challenge was Rodriguez. His injuries were severe enough that moving him risked making things worse, but staying meant certain capture or death for all of them. Sarah made the hard choice that command training had prepared her for. Chief, we're going to carry you out, but I need you to stay conscious and help us navigate to the compound. Rodriguez managed a weak smile. That's why they pay you the big bucks, Lieutenant. I've got confidence in you. Using salvaged equipment, they created a makeshift stretcher for Rodriguez. Sarah distributed the remaining ammunition and medical supplies among the team, keeping the demolitions equipment with her. As the first enemy patrol appeared through the jungle, visible through the trees about 200 yards away, she led her wounded team away from the crash site. The jungle was thick and humid, making every step a challenge even for healthy soldiers. With 3 wounded teammates, progress was painfully slow. Sarah took point, using her knife to clear a path through the undergrowth while constantly listening for sounds of pursuit. Behind her, Thompson and Williams took turns helping carry Rodriguez, who drifted in and out of consciousness. After an hour of difficult movement, they stopped in a small clearing to reassess their situation. Williams had managed to establish brief radio contact with their command base, but the news wasn't encouraging. The nearest friendly forces were 8 hours away, and weather conditions were preventing immediate air support. They were on their own until dawn at the earliest. How far to the compound? Sarah asked Rodriguez during one of his conscious moments. Maybe 3 miles northeast, he whispered. But there's a problem. Intelligence was wrong about the garrison's strength. I count at least 40 hostiles, not 20. And they've got heavy weapons. This changed everything. A 4-person team might have been able to handle 20 lightly armed guards, but 40 well-equipped soldiers was a different matter entirely. Sarah studied her options while applying fresh dressings to Thompson's wounds. The smart tactical choice would be to find a defensive position, wait for rescue, and abort the primary mission. But Harrison was still in that compound, and every hour of delay increased the chances that he would be moved or executed. More importantly, he possessed critical intelligence about enemy operations throughout the region. If that information fell into the wrong hands, it could compromise operations across 3 countries and cost hundreds of American lives. Sarah made her decision. We're going to continue the mission, but we're changing the approach. Thompson, you and Williams are going to find a good overwatch position and provide covering fire when we extract. Chief, you're staying with them to coordinate. That means you're going in alone, Rodriguez protested. That's suicide, Mitchell. No, Chief, it's what I trained for. I can move faster alone, and my demolitions background gives us options that a full team assault wouldn't have. She began redistributing equipment again, keeping only essential gear. If I'm not back in 6 hours, Williams calls for extraction and you all get out of here. As darkness fell over the jungle, Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Sarah moved through the jungle with the patience of a predator stalking prey. Every step was calculated, every breath controlled. The SEAL training had taught her that successful infiltration was 90% preparation and 10% execution, but in hostile territory with no backup, those percentages felt reversed. She had been moving for 2 hours since leaving her wounded teammates, covering ground that should have taken 30 minutes, but stealth was more important than speed. The compound finally came into view through her night vision scope. Intelligence had been wrong about more than just the number of defenders. What they had described as a simple wooden structure was actually a concrete facility with multiple buildings, guard towers, and sophisticated perimeter defenses. Razor wire formed 3 concentric circles around the main structures, and she counted at least 6 guard positions with overlapping fields of fire. Sarah settled into a grove of thick trees about 400 yards from the perimeter and began her detailed observation. Professional reconnaissance required patience, and she spent the next 3 hours mapping guard rotations, identifying weak points in the defenses, and locating the most likely building where Harrison would be held. The guards changed shifts every 2 hours, and, during the transition, there was a 7-minute window when the eastern approach would be minimally covered. Through her scope, she could see into several of the buildings through windows and open doors. Most appeared to be barracks or supply storage, but one structure in the center of the compound had bars on the windows and guards posted at both entrances. That had to be where they were holding Harrison. The building was 2 stories tall, built from reinforced concrete, with only 2 access points that she could identify. The guard force was professional and well-equipped. These weren't random militiamen but trained soldiers with modern weapons and night vision equipment. Their patrol patterns were disciplined, and they maintained good communications discipline. Sarah counted 42 active personnel during her observation period, which meant there were probably another 20 sleeping or off-duty inside the buildings. As dawn approached, she noticed increased activity around the compound. Vehicles were being prepared for movement, and personnel were loading equipment into trucks. Through her scope, she saw what looked like someone being moved from the detention building to one of the vehicles under heavy guard. Even at this distance, she recognized Harrison's distinctive walk and build. Time was running out. If they moved Harrison to another location, the chances of successful extraction would drop to nearly 0. Sarah had to act immediately, but a direct assault against 60+ hostiles was impossible for one person. She needed to use her demolitions expertise to level the playing field and create enough chaos to mask her real objective. Sarah moved closer to the compound, using the pre-dawn darkness for concealment. The eastern approach she had identified during reconnaissance was her best option. The guard towers on that side had the worst visibility due to a large tree that partially blocked their view, and the perimeter defenses were slightly weaker where a small stream ran close to the fence line. The stream provided excellent concealment as she moved within 50 yards of the outer perimeter. She could hear guards talking in low voices and smell cigarette smoke from their positions. Her heart rate remained steady despite the extreme danger. The months of training under stress had prepared her body and mind for exactly this situation. The first obstacle was the razor wire. Sarah had practiced this dozens of times, but never in actual combat conditions with armed guards just yards away. She used specialized cutters to create a small gap in the wire, working slowly to avoid making noise. Each cut sounded impossibly loud to her ears, but the guards seemed unaware of her presence. Once through the perimeter wire, she had to cross 30 yards of open ground to reach the nearest building. This was the most dangerous part of the approach because if any guard happened to look in her direction, she would be completely exposed. She timed her movement to coincide with the guard change, using those precious 7 minutes of reduced coverage. The building she reached was a supply storage facility, giving her access to the interior of the compound without being detected. Through the windows, she could see crates of ammunition, weapons, and other military equipment. More importantly, she could see the detention building where Harrison was being held, now only 100 yards away across the central courtyard. But, as she prepared to move toward her objective, she heard voices approaching her position. 2 guards were walking directly toward the building where she was hiding, apparently conducting a random security check. Sarah pressed herself against the wall beside the door, hand on her sidearm, ready to fight if necessary. The guards stopped just outside the building, and she could hear them talking about their upcoming patrol duties. One guard mentioned that the prisoner would be moved within the hour to a more secure location 50 miles to the north. The other guard complained about having to work extra shifts because of increased security alerts in the region. This conversation changed everything. Harrison was being moved much sooner than she had anticipated, and to a location that would make rescue virtually impossible. She had perhaps 30 minutes before the prisoner transfer began, and once Harrison was in a vehicle surrounded by armed escorts, her mission would fail. Sarah quickly revised her plan. Instead of a careful infiltration followed by a quiet extraction, she would need to create maximum chaos to prevent the prisoner transfer while simultaneously rescuing Harrison. Her demolitions training suddenly became the key to mission success. Working quickly but quietly, she began placing explosive charges around the supply building. The ammunition stored there would amplify the explosion exponentially, creating confusion and drawing guards away from the detention facility. She set the timer for 15 minutes, giving herself enough time to reach Harrison before the fireworks started. Moving through the compound now required maximum stealth because dawn was breaking and visibility was improving rapidly. She stayed in the shadows between buildings, moving when guards were looking away, freezing when anyone turned in her direction. The distance to the detention building felt like miles, though it was only a few hundred feet. The detention building had 2 guards at the front entrance and probably more inside. Sarah circled to the rear and found a small window that appeared to lead to a storage room rather than a cell block. The window was barred, but the bars were set into mortar that had deteriorated over time. Using her knife and specialized tools, she was able to work one bar loose enough to create a gap she could squeeze through. Inside the building, she found herself in a narrow hallway lined with cell doors. Most of the cells appeared empty, but she could hear someone moving around in the cell at the far end of the corridor. As she approached carefully, keeping her weapon ready, she saw Harrison sitting on a narrow cot, his face showing the signs of several days of rough treatment. "Commander Harrison," she whispered through the bars. He looked up sharply, surprise and hope flickering across his features. "Mitchell? What are you doing here? Where's the rest of your team?" "Long story, sir. We're getting you out of here, but we need to move fast. They are planning to transfer you in 20 minutes, and I've got explosives set to detonate in 10. Harrison stood up immediately, his military bearing intact despite his ordeal. "What do you need me to do?" The cell door was secured with a modern electronic lock, far beyond Sarah's lockpicking skills. But her demolitions expertise offered another solution. She placed a small shaped charge against the lock mechanism, carefully calculated to destroy the lock without killing anyone in the cell or alerting the guards at the front of the building. "Cover your ears and get against the far wall," she instructed. The explosion was sharp and focused, completely destroying the lock mechanism while making relatively little noise. The cell door swung open, and Harrison stepped out, moving stiffly but under his own power. "Can you run?" she asked, handing him a spare sidearm from her kit. "I can do whatever's necessary to get out of here," he replied, checking the weapon professionally. They had perhaps 5 minutes before her charges detonated in the supply building. Sarah led Harrison back through the corridor toward the window she had used to enter, but as they approached the storage room, they heard voices in the hallway behind them. The guards had discovered something was wrong, probably the damaged cell door. "Through the window, fast," Sarah ordered. Harrison squeezed through the opening with some difficulty, his larger frame making the passage more challenging than it had been for her. As he dropped to the ground outside, Sarah heard footsteps running down the corridor toward their position. She was halfway through the window when a guard appeared in the doorway behind her. He shouted an alarm and raised his rifle, but Sarah was already moving. She completed her exit through the window as gunfire erupted behind her, bullets shattering the window frame where she had been moments before. Now the entire compound was alerted to their presence. Sirens began wailing, spotlights swept across the grounds, and she could hear guards shouting orders and coordinating a search. She and Harrison had maybe 2 minutes before her explosives detonated, and they needed to be well clear of the area when that happened. This way, she directed, leading Harrison toward the eastern perimeter where she had entered the compound. But their route was now blocked by guards responding to the alarm. Spotlights swept back and forth across the courtyard, and she could see armed personnel taking positions around the detention building. They were forced to take shelter behind a small maintenance building while guards searched the area around them. Sarah checked her watch, 90 seconds until the explosives detonated. When that happened, their window of escape would open, but only if they were in position to take advantage of the chaos. When the explosion happens, we run for the eastern fence, she explained quickly to Harrison. There's a gap in the wire about 50 yards north of the stream. My team is providing overwatch from the hills beyond the perimeter. Harrison nodded, his expression focused and determined. Despite days of captivity and the stress of their current situation, he was ready to fight his way out. The training that had made him a successful intelligence officer was evident in his calm professionalism under extreme pressure. The explosion, when it came, exceeded even Sarah's expectations. The ammunition Sarah and Harrison ran through the jungle undergrowth as the sounds of chaos echoed behind them from the burning compound. The explosion had worked better than planned, creating enough confusion to mask their escape, but it also meant that every enemy soldier in the area now knew there was a hostile presence. Search parties would be organized within minutes, and tracking dogs would follow soon after. "How far to your team?" Harrison asked as they paused to catch their breath after covering the first half-mile. Despite his ordeal in captivity, he was keeping pace well, though Sarah could see the strain in his movements. "Another 2 miles through difficult terrain," she replied, checking her compass and listening for sounds of pursuit. "But we've got a problem." When I left them, Rodriguez was seriously wounded, Thompson had internal injuries, and Williams had a broken arm. They might not be in any condition to move when we get there. Harrison absorbed this information with the pragmatic attitude of an experienced officer. "What kind of extraction plan do we have?" "That's still being worked out. Communications are spotty, and the nearest friendly forces are hours away. We might be walking out on foot." Sarah began moving again, setting a pace that balanced speed with stealth. "The good news is that I know this terrain better now, and my team has had time to set up a defensive position." As they moved through the jungle, Sarah's training in escape and evasion took over completely. She used natural features to mask their trail, changed direction frequently to confuse trackers, and chose routes that would be difficult for vehicles to follow. Every few hundred yards, she stopped to listen for sounds of pursuit and to check Harrison's condition. Behind them, the glow from the burning compound was still visible through the trees, and they could hear vehicles starting up and moving in various directions. The enemy was organizing search parties, probably using multiple approaches to try to intercept them before they could reach friendly forces. Time was working against them with each passing minute. "Tell me about your team," Harrison said as they navigated around a steep ravine. "I need to know what condition they are really in so we can plan accordingly." Sarah provided a concise assessment while continuing to move. Rodriguez took the worst damage in the crash. Head trauma, severe leg injury, probably a concussion. He was drifting in and out of consciousness when I left. Thompson has internal bleeding, definitely needs medical attention but was still functional. Williams broke his arm but could still operate communications equipment. "Sounds like they need immediate medical evacuation," Harrison observed. "That complicates our extraction significantly." They covered another mile before encountering their first major obstacle. A stream that had been barely knee-deep during Sarah's earlier reconnaissance was now a rushing torrent due to rain in the mountains upstream. The water was moving too fast to wade across safely, and the banks were too steep to climb easily. "We need to find a better crossing point," Sarah decided, studying the water flow. "This current would sweep us downstream, and we can't afford to get separated or lose equipment." They followed the stream bank for nearly a quarter mile before finding a spot where fallen trees created a makeshift bridge across the water. The crossing was treacherous, requiring careful balance and steady nerves, but they managed to get across without mishap. However, The detour had cost them precious time and energy. As they resumed their journey toward the team's position, Sarah noticed that Harrison was beginning to show more obvious signs of fatigue. His pace was slowing slightly, and his breathing was becoming more labored. The stress of captivity, combined with the physical demands of their escape, was taking its toll despite his determination to keep moving. "Commander, how are you holding up?" she asked during their next brief rest stop. "I'll make it to your team's position," he replied firmly. "After that, we'll reassess based on what kind of extraction options we have." He checked the spare weapon she had given him, ensuring it was ready for use. "What's our biggest threat right now?" "Time and numbers," Sarah answered honestly. "They've got enough personnel to set up multiple search teams, and they know this area better than we do. Plus, they'll have radio communications to coordinate their efforts while we're operating with limited intel." The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance confirmed her assessment. The enemy was bringing air assets into the search, which would dramatically reduce their chances of avoiding detection in daylight. They needed to reach the team's overwatch position quickly and find concealment before full dawn arrived. Sarah increased their pace, pushing through increasingly thick vegetation as they climbed toward the higher ground where she had left her wounded teammates. The jungle was becoming more difficult to navigate, with thorny vines and fallen logs blocking their path, but the terrain would also provide better concealment from aerial observation. When they were still half a mile from the team's position, Sarah heard the distinctive crack of rifle fire ahead of them. The sharp reports were immediately answered by automatic weapons fire from multiple positions. Her team was under attack, probably by an enemy patrol that had been searching the area systematically. "That's my people," she told Harrison, checking her weapon and preparing for combat. "Sounds like they've made contact with hostiles." "What's the plan?" Harrison asked, also readying his sidearm and checking his remaining ammunition. "We provide flanking support and try to break up the enemy attack," Sarah decided. "Thompson's probably the only one in condition to return effective fire, so they are badly outnumbered. We need to hit the attackers from an unexpected direction." They moved carefully toward the sound of gunfire, using the terrain for concealment while trying to assess the tactical situation ahead of them. Through the trees, Sarah could see muzzle flashes from what appeared to be at least 6 enemy positions surrounding her team's defensive position. The volume of return fire from her teammates was much lighter, confirming her fears about their condition. Sarah studied the enemy positions through her scope, identifying the locations of individual attackers and looking for weaknesses in their deployment. They had established a classic encirclement, with automatic weapons positioned to prevent any escape from the defensive position where her team was trapped. "I'm going to work around to their left flank," she explained to Harrison. "When I open fire, you hit them from this position to create crossfire. Focus on the machine gun position on the right side of their line." Harrison nodded his understanding. Despite being out of combat for several days and operating with minimal equipment, he showed no hesitation about engaging a superior enemy force. His experience and training were evident in his calm preparation for battle. Sarah began her flanking movement, using available cover to get within effective range of the enemy positions without being detected. The jungle provided excellent concealment, but movement was slow and required extreme care to avoid making noise that would reveal her location to the attackers. When she reached a position about 50 yards from the nearest enemy machine gun nest, she could see the full tactical picture clearly for the first time. 8 enemy soldiers had her team pinned down in a rocky outcropping that provided good defensive cover but limited options for withdrawal. Thompson was returning fire from behind a large boulder, but his movements were slow and painful. She couldn't see Rodriguez or Williams clearly, which probably meant they were unable to contribute to the defense. The enemy commander was directing his forces professionally, using coordinated fire and movement to maintain pressure while preventing her team from escaping or improving their position. If the situation continued unchanged, it would only be a matter of time before superior numbers and firepower overwhelmed her wounded teammates. Sarah took careful aim at the enemy machine gunner and fired a single shot that dropped him immediately. Before the other attackers could react, she shifted position and engaged a rifleman who was moving to flank Thompson's position. Her shots were accurate and devastating, trained precision meeting combat necessity. Harrison opened fire from his position simultaneously, his shots forcing the enemy soldiers to take cover and disrupting their coordinated attack. The sudden appearance of additional hostile fire from an unexpected direction created exactly the confusion Sarah had hoped for. The enemy force found themselves caught between defensive fire from the original position and attacking fire from two new directions. Their tactical advantage evaporated as they were forced to split their attention and firepower among multiple threats. Several soldiers began withdrawing to more defensive positions, breaking up their coordinated assault. Sarah continued her attack, moving between positions to make the enemy think they were facing a larger force than was actually present. Her training in small unit tactics proved invaluable as she used terrain, timing, and accurate shooting to maximize her impact on the engagement. Thompson recognized what was happening and increased his own rate of fire, keeping pressure on the enemy positions that Sarah and Harrison weren't directly engaging. Despite his injuries, his marksmanship remained excellent, and his shots forced several attackers to abandon exposed positions. Within 10 minutes of Sarah's initial shot, the enemy force was in full retreat. 3 of their soldiers had been killed, and the others were withdrawing under covering fire from their automatic weapons. The attack had been broken, but Sarah knew this was only temporary relief. More enemy forces would arrive soon, probably in greater numbers and with better coordination. She reached her team's position as the last enemy soldiers disappeared into the jungle. Thompson was conscious and alert despite obvious pain from his injuries. Williams was awake but pale, his broken arm immobilized in a makeshift sling. Rodriguez was unconscious but breathing steadily, his head wound bandaged with field dressings. "Chief's been out for about an hour," Thompson reported. Williams managed to raise command on the radio, but extraction is still at least 6 hours away. Weather's keeping air support grounded, and the nearest ground forces are dealing with another situation. Harrison knelt beside Rodriguez to assess his condition while Sarah checked the team's defensive preparations. They had chosen their position well, with good fields of fire and multiple covered approaches, but they wouldn't be able to hold against a determined attack by a larger force. "We need to move," Sarah decided. "They'll be back with reinforcements." Proba Sarah made the hardest decision of her military career as she looked at her wounded team members and considered their impossible situation. Moving 4 people through hostile territory when 3 of them were seriously injured went against every tactical principle she had learned, but staying in place meant certain death or capture when enemy reinforcements arrived. "We're going to attempt a fighting withdrawal to the secondary extraction point," she announced, spreading her map on the ground so everyone could see their proposed route. "It's 8 miles through difficult terrain, but it puts us closer to friendly forces and gives us multiple options for eventual pickup." Harrison studied the map while Thompson and Williams prepared what equipment they could carry. Rodriguez remained unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. The head injury was serious, and moving him would be extremely dangerous, but leaving him behind wasn't an option that any of them would consider. "That route takes us through 2 river crossings and some exposed ground," Harrison observed. "How do we handle security with this many casualties?" "You and Thompson provide rearguard action if we make contact," Sarah explained. "Williams handles communications and navigation support. I'll take point and carry Rodriguez." She had already begun fashioning an improved stretcher from salvaged equipment and local materials. Thompson tried to stand up fully and immediately winced with pain from his internal injuries. "Lieutenant, I can fight, but sustained movement is going to be a problem. This bleeding isn't getting better." Sarah assessed Thompson's condition more carefully. His face was pale, and there were signs that his internal injuries were worsening despite the field treatment he had received. Moving him 8 miles might kill him, but staying in place definitely would when the enemy returned in force. "We'll take it slow and stop for medical checks every hour," she decided. "If anyone can't continue, we reassess our options then. But right now, movement gives us our best chance of survival." Williams managed to establish brief radio contact with their command base during final preparations for departure. The news was mixed. Friendly forces were making progress toward their area, but enemy activity was increasing throughout the region. Multiple search teams were operating in their vicinity, and aerial reconnaissance had identified several roadblocks on possible escape routes. Extraction window opens at 1400 hours, Williams reported. If we can reach checkpoint Alpha by then, they can get us out. But that's 6 hours from now, and checkpoint Alpha is 12 miles from here. The distance was impossible for their group in their current condition. Sarah quickly calculated alternatives while finishing work on Rodriguez's stretcher. We head for checkpoint Bravo instead. It's only 5 miles, and the terrain is better suited for our situation. Bravo's not confirmed as secure, Williams warned. Command thinks there might be enemy presence in that area. Everything in this region has enemy presence, Sarah replied. We picked the option that gives us the best chance of getting there alive. They began moving as the sun climbed higher, bringing both better visibility and increased risk of detection. Sarah took the lead position, carrying her share of Rodriguez's stretcher while maintaining constant awareness of their surroundings. The pace was necessarily slow, but they were making steady progress through the jungle terrain. Harrison proved invaluable during the movement, using his intelligence training to help navigate around potential ambush sites and his combat experience to provide tactical advice about their route selection. Despite his recent captivity, his professional skills were intact and his leadership experience complemented Sarah's technical expertise perfectly. After 2 hours of movement, they reached their first major obstacle, a river crossing that was more challenging than Sarah's map had indicated. Recent rains had raised the water level significantly, and the current was strong enough to pose a serious threat to anyone attempting to cross while carrying equipment or injured personnel. We need to find a better crossing point, Thompson advised, though his voice showed the strain of the morning's movement. This current would take Rodriguez away from us before we could get him across safely. They spent precious time moving along the riverbank, looking for a safer crossing while constantly watching for signs of enemy pursuit. Sarah found what they needed about half a mile downstream, a fallen tree that created a natural bridge across the water, though using it would require careful coordination and some risk. Williams goes first with the radio, Sarah directed. Harrison and Thompson cross together, then help me get Rodriguez across on the stretcher. The plan was simple but dangerous, since anyone crossing would be completely exposed for several minutes. Williams made it across successfully despite his broken arm, immediately taking up a security position on the far side. Harrison and Thompson followed, though Thompson needed assistance due to his injuries. The crossing was taking much longer than Sarah had hoped, increasing their vulnerability to discovery. Getting Rodriguez across was the most challenging part of the operation. Sarah had to secure him to the stretcher to prevent him from falling into the river if he regained consciousness during the crossing, then carefully maneuver the stretcher across the fallen tree while maintaining her own balance. One mistake would send both of them into the fast-moving water. Halfway across, Rodriguez began to stir, apparently responding to the movement and change in position. He opened his eyes and seemed confused about his surroundings, but remained still when Sarah quietly told him what was happening. His consciousness was encouraging, but she could see that his head injury was still affecting his mental clarity. They completed the river crossing without incident, but the effort had cost them nearly an hour of travel time and significantly increased everyone's fatigue levels. Thompson was showing obvious signs that his internal injuries were worsening, and Williams was struggling with exhaustion despite his determination to continue. How much farther to checkpoint Bravo? Harrison asked during their next rest break. Sarah checked her map and calculated their remaining distance based on their reduced rate of travel. About 3 miles, but we're moving slower than planned. At this rate, we'll reach the checkpoint after the extraction window closes. This news created a serious problem for mission planning. Missing the extraction window meant spending another night in hostile territory with wounded team members, no medical support, and enemy forces actively searching for them. Their situation would only get worse with each passing hour. What if we split up? Williams suggested. Someone could move ahead to the checkpoint and ensure the extraction team knows our situation. Sarah considered this option but rejected it quickly. We stay together. Splitting up just gives the enemy easier targets, and we need all our firepower if we make contact. she made another difficult command decision. We're going to have to pick up the pace, even if it means taking more risks. The increased pace was harder on everyone, especially Thompson and Rodriguez, but they continued making progress toward their objective. Sarah rotated the stretcher-carrying duties among team members to prevent any one person from becoming completely exhausted, though she took the largest share of the physical burden. They were within 2 miles of Checkpoint Bravo when they encountered their next major challenge. Through her binoculars, Sarah could see an enemy patrol moving along their intended route of travel. 6 soldiers were conducting a methodical search pattern, checking likely hiding spots and setting up an observation post that would overlook the checkpoint area. Looks like Williams was right about enemy presence around Bravo, Harrison observed quietly. They are positioned to intercept anyone trying to reach that location. Sarah studied the enemy patrol through her scope while considering alternative options. Going around them would add several miles to their journey and probably cause them to miss the extraction window entirely. Fighting through them was possible but would alert every enemy unit in the area to their presence and location. We wait for them to move, she decided. Their search pattern will take them away from our route in about 30 minutes. We can slip past them while they are focused on other areas. But waiting meant losing precious time they couldn't afford to lose. Sarah watched the enemy patrol through her binoculars, looking for any change in their pattern or indication that they might move away from the checkpoint approach sooner than anticipated. After 20 minutes of observation, she noticed something that changed the tactical situation completely. The enemy patrol was setting up what appeared to be a permanent observation post, not conducting a routine search that would move them away from the area. They were planning to stay in position indefinitely, making it impossible to slip past them undetected. Change of plans, Sarah announced to her team. They are setting up a permanent position. We're going to have to fight through them to reach the checkpoint. Thompson checked his weapon and ammunition despite his obvious pain. How do we do this with Rodriguez unconscious and Williams operating one-handed? Sarah had been working on tactical solutions during their observation period. Harrison and I assault their position from 2 directions while you provide covering fire from here. Williams stays with Rodriguez and keeps communications open with the extraction team. It was a desperate plan with significant risks, but waiting for the enemy to leave wasn't an option, and finding an alternative route would take too long. Sometimes leadership meant accepting high-risk options when all the alternatives were worse. Harrison checked his equipment and weapon while studying the enemy poses. Sarah synchronized her watch with Harrison's as they prepared for the assault on the enemy observation post. Every detail mattered now because they would have only one chance to break through the hostile position and reach the extraction point before the window closed. Behind them, Williams was trying to establish radio contact with the incoming extraction team while Thompson prepared to provide covering fire despite his worsening injuries. Remember, speed and violence of action, Sarah reminded Harrison as they checked their weapons one final time. We hit them hard and fast before they can organize effective resistance or call for reinforcements. Harrison nodded, his expression focused and determined. Despite days of captivity and the stress of their escape, he was ready to fight. The intelligence officer who had recommended Sarah for SEAL training was about to demonstrate why his own combat reputation was well earned throughout the special operations community. Rodriguez stirred on his stretcher, consciousness returning gradually as the effects of his head injury began to subside. His eyes opened and tracked to Sarah's position, recognition flickering across his features despite obvious confusion about their current situation. "Chief, can you hear me?" Sarah asked quietly, kneeling beside the stretcher while keeping her weapon ready. "Mitchell?" Rodriguez's voice was weak but clear. "What's our situation?" "We're about to assault an enemy position blocking our route to extraction," she explained quickly. "You need to stay still and let Williams take care of you until we clear the objective." Rodriguez tried to sit up but fell back immediately as pain and dizziness overwhelmed him. "I can fight, Lieutenant. Give me a weapon." "Chief, you've got a serious head injury. The best thing you can do right now is follow orders and let us handle this." Sarah's tone was firm but respectful. Rodriguez was still her superior officer, but his injuries made it impossible for him to resume command effectively. Williams finally succeeded in establishing radio contact with the extraction team. Viper 6, this is Angel 2. We are approaching checkpoint Bravo with casualties, but the LZ is occupied by hostile forces. Request immediate air support for LZ clearance. The response crackled through the radio with frustrating news. Angel 2, negative on immediate air support. Weather conditions preventing close air support missions. Ground extraction team is en route to your location but will not arrive for another 90 minutes. Sarah absorbed this information while studying the enemy position through her binoculars. 90 minutes was far too long to wait with wounded team members and enemy forces searching the area. They needed to clear the landing zone themselves and hope the extraction helicopter could reach them before additional hostile forces arrived. Thompson, how are you holding up? She asked, checking on his condition before beginning the assault. I can shoot straight and hold position, he replied, though his face showed the strain of his injuries. Not sure about much movement, but I'll give you good covering fire. Sarah made her final preparations for the assault, distributing ammunition and coordinating timing with Harrison. The enemy position consisted of 6 soldiers with automatic weapons and good defensive cover, but they were focused on observing approaches to the checkpoint rather than defending against attack from their current direction. Harrison takes the left flank, I take the right. Thompson, you suppress the center position with aimed fire. Williams, stay with Rodriguez and be ready to guide the extraction team to our location. Sarah checked her remaining explosive devices. I'll use my last charges to break up their position if the small arms attack doesn't work. At exactly 1,347 hours, Sarah and Harrison began their coordinated assault on the enemy observation post. Sarah moved through the jungle undergrowth with practiced stealth, getting within 30 yards of the rightmost enemy position before being detected. When the first hostile soldier spotted her movement and raised his weapon, she was already shooting. Her initial shots eliminated 2 enemy soldiers before the others could react effectively to the sudden attack. Harrison's assault from the left flank began simultaneously, his accurate fire forcing the remaining enemies to take cover and split their attention between multiple threats. Thompson's covering fire from the main position was precise and devastating, his sniper training evident despite his injuries. Each shot he fired found its target, preventing the enemy soldiers from organizing coordinated resistance or calling for reinforcements on their radio equipment. The engagement lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours as Sarah maneuvered between positions, using her remaining ammunition carefully while Harrison maintained pressure from his direction. The enemy soldiers fought professionally but were overwhelmed by the sudden coordinated attack from multiple directions. When the shooting finally stopped, all 6 enemy soldiers had been eliminated, and the checkpoint area was secure for the incoming extraction. Sarah quickly checked Harrison for injuries. He had taken a minor wound on his left arm but remained fully functional. Thompson had exhausted his ammunition but was conscious and alert. Williams, contact the extraction team and let them know the LZ is clear, Sarah ordered while checking the area for additional threats. Give them our exact coordinates and casualty status. The radio conversation with the extraction team brought welcome news. The helicopter was already en route and would reach their position within 20 minutes. Medical personnel were on board to provide immediate treatment for Thompson and Rodriguez, and armed escorts would provide security during the pickup operation. Sarah used the time to improve their defensive position around the landing zone, placing the wounded team members in covered positions and establishing security watches to detect any approaching enemy forces. Harrison helped with the preparations despite his arm wound, his military experience proving valuable during the final phase of their escape. Rodriguez regained full consciousness as they waited for extraction, his mental clarity returning gradually as the effects of his head injury subsided. He assessed the situation quickly and approved of Sarah's leadership decisions throughout the crisis. You did good, Mitchell, he said quietly. Command made the right choice putting you through SEAL training, even when some people had their doubts. Thank you, Chief. I had excellent teammates to work with. Sarah continued scanning their perimeter while talking. The mission isn't over until we're all safely back at base. The sound of approaching helicopter rotors reached them right on schedule. Sarah popped a smoke grenade to mark their position as the aircraft appeared above the jungle canopy. The pilot had to navigate carefully through the trees to reach the small clearing they were using as a landing zone, but his flying skills were exceptional. The extraction went smoothly, with medical personnel immediately beginning treatment of Thompson and Rodriguez while the helicopter crew provided security during boarding. Within minutes, all 5 team members were aboard the aircraft and climbing away from the hostile territory that had nearly claimed their lives. As they flew toward safety, Sarah reflected on the events of the past 36 hours. The mission had begun as a routine extraction operation but had turned into a survival ordeal that tested every aspect of her training and leadership abilities. 3 of her teammates had been seriously wounded, she had been forced to take command in the middle of a crisis, and they had faced overwhelming odds throughout their escape. But the mission had been successful. Harrison was safe, his critical intelligence was preserved, and every member of her team was alive and receiving medical treatment. The compound that had held him was destroyed, eliminating a significant enemy asset in the region. Harrison moved carefully to Sarah's position in the helicopter, his arm in a sling but his expression showing satisfaction with their accomplishment. "That intelligence I was carrying," he said quietly. "It identified enemy plans for attacks against 3 different American bases. Your mission saved a lot of lives beyond just mine." Sarah nodded, understanding the broader significance of their success. Military operations often had consequences far beyond what individual participants could see, and knowing that their efforts had prevented attacks against other American forces made the risks and sacrifices worthwhile. Thompson and Rodriguez were both stable and responding well to medical treatment. The flight medic reported that both would make full recoveries with proper hospital care, and their injuries would not prevent them from returning to active duty after appropriate rehabilitation periods. Williams, despite his broken arm, was already working on mission reports and communications with their command base. The professionalism and dedication of her teammates had been evident throughout the crisis, and Sarah felt privileged to have served with such outstanding soldiers. As the helicopter crossed into friendly territory and began its approach to their base, Sarah allowed herself to feel the satisfaction of mission accomplishment. The doubters who had questioned whether women could succeed in the most demanding military units had been proven wrong through actions rather than arguments. The aircraft touched down on the landing pad at their base, where medical teams and debriefing officers were waiting to receive them. As they transferred Rodriguez and Thompson to stretchers for transport to the base hospital, Sarah realized that the most important lesson of their ordeal had been about teamwork, leadership, and the absolute refusal to abandon fellow soldiers regardless of the personal cost. 3 days later, as she completed her written mission reports in the base headquarters, Sarah received word that her performance during the crisis had earned her a recommendation for promotion and assignment to an advanced leadership position within the Special Operations community. The mission that had begun with being forced from a crashed helicopter had ended with proof that Navy SEALs never give up, never leave anyone behind, and always find a way to complete the mission against impossible odds. Harrison stopped by her office before departing for his next assignment, his arm still in a sling but his recovery progressing well. "I wanted to thank you personally for what you did out there," he said. "You saved my life, saved your team, and prevented a lot of other people from getting hurt. That's what SEALs do, Commander. We take care of each other." Sarah looked up from her reports and smiled. "Besides, you recommended me for this program. I was just proving that your judgment was sound." As Harrison left, Sarah returned to her mission reports, documenting the lessons learned and tactical innovations that had made their success possible. The next generation of SEAL trainees would study these reports and learn from the experiences of Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the SEAL who had been forced from a helicopter and had proven that training, determination, and teamwork could overcome any obstacle. The phone rang with notification of her next mission assignment. Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, was ready for whatever challenge came next. "Tie on. When do we go?" 10 minutes, Sarah replied. "That gives Williams time to contact the extraction team and let them know we're coming in hot." As they prepared for what could be their final engagement, Sarah felt the weight of command responsibility more heavily than ever before. Every decision she had made since taking command had led to this moment, where success or failure would determine whether her team lived or died. But she was a Navy SEAL, trained for exactly these impossible situations. The enemy had superior numbers and position, but they didn't have her determination, her training, or her absolute refusal to abandon her teammates. The final phase of their escape was about to begin, and Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was ready to prove that SEALs fight hardest when the odds are most against them. Bly within the hour. Rodriguez needs medical attention that we can't provide here, and staying in a fixed position gives them too many advantages. Where can we go? Williams asked. Rodriguez can't walk, and I'm not much use with one arm. Sarah studied her map while considering their limited options. Moving 4 people through hostile territory, 3 of them wounded, would be extremely difficult under the best circumstances. With enemy forces actively hunting them and no immediate extraction available, their situation was becoming desperate. But giving up wasn't an option. She was a Navy SEAL, trained to accomplish impossible missions under the worst possible conditions. Her team was counting on her leadership. Harrison needed to get his intelligence back to command, and, somewhere in the distance, friendly forces were working to reach them. The mission was far from over, and Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was about to prove that SEALs never quit, no matter how impossible the odds become. Stored in the supply building created a secondary blast that lit up the entire compound and shook the ground like an earthquake. Debris rained down across the area, and the shockwave shattered windows in nearby buildings. The effect was exactly what she had hoped for, complete chaos and confusion among the enemy forces. "Go," she shouted, and they ran toward the perimeter as guards everywhere turned toward the massive fire and explosion behind them. Some guards were running toward the blast to fight the fire, others were taking cover, and most were completely disoriented by the sudden destruction of a major building. They reached the fence line as Sarah had planned, squeezed through the gap in the wire, and kept running toward the jungle. Behind them, the compound was in complete chaos, with sirens wailing, fires burning, and personnel scrambling to respond to multiple emergencies. Their escape had succeeded, but the hardest part still lay ahead, getting through miles of hostile territory with enemy forces in pursuit. Her rifle was clean and functional, she had 8 magazines of ammunition, her sidearm was ready, and her demolitions kit contained enough explosive to level a small building. More importantly, she had something that couldn't be measured in equipment, the absolute determination to bring Harrison home and prove that SEALs never leave anyone behind. The enemy compound lay somewhere ahead in the darkness, defended by 40 hostile soldiers who had no idea that one very determined Navy SEAL was coming for their prisoner. Sarah had trained for moments like this her entire career, but training was about to meet reality in the most dangerous way possible. She kissed the small photo of her family that she kept in her helmet, said a quiet prayer, and disappeared into the jungle night. Behind her, 3 wounded teammates took up overwatch positions and prepared to provide whatever support they could. The mission was just beginning, and Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was about to prove that being forced from a helicopter was just the first step in a much larger fight. The compound's lights were barely visible through the trees ahead when Sarah finally stopped to make her detailed reconnaissance. Everything depended on what she discovered in the next few hours, and failure meant not just her own life, but the lives of her team and potentially hundreds of other American service members. The jungle had tested her, but the real test was still ahead.